So this is Infinix's first Ultra smartphone. First impressions? There is a lot, and I mean a lot going on here. I've never been so overwhelmed by how much is packed into a phone before. From unboxing, to specs, to features, you name it, this phone has it. And it comes in this box. Everything you're about to see in this box, including the device, is designed by the Italian car designer firm Pininfarina. In the box to the left, there's an included screen protector, a MagSafe case which has a leather backplate, a MagSafe charger to match, a matching black charging cable, a 100-watt charging block that's also black, and even a pair of Type-C earphones. In the box to the right, there's a supercar-inspired MagCharge base, built with zinc alloy and has a carbon fiber finish, along with a fancy card that holds a car-themed SIM ejector tool. And then of course in the middle we have the phone itself, which has the same design language as all of its included accessories. That's a lot of box contents for a phone that comes in at around $750 US. And before you ask, yes, if you personally buy this phone, everything that you see here is what you'll get, including that massive box. Alright, no doubt this phone is extra ultra in terms of box contents. And I'm telling you right now, it is extra ultra in terms of what is actually packed into this device. I'm not talking about flagship specs, but more about how many features are packed into the phone. It is insane, which we'll get to in a sec. But is it actually ultra where it matters? Because if it can't nail the fundamentals, then all this extra stuff is kind of pointless. It comes in 4 different colors, themed around the Italian car culture. I have it in Torino black, and it's certainly unique. The backplate has a carbon fiber look, and it's smooth to the touch, but there's no word on the material used. That sleek-looking camera island is protected by Gorilla Glass Victus though, and it's supposedly the world's first uni-chassis camera module. It's definitely something you'll be keen to show off, but to me it resembles more of a car's rear window, since underneath it sits what Infinix is calling a floating tail light, and it certainly looks the part. Inside that camera module sits a triple camera system, which we'll get to later, but beside that, inside the same piece rests an active matrix display, which has certainly been inspired from another phone brand. It's there for notifications, but so is the tail light. There's a bunch of different animal animations to choose from that do different things. It can indicate charging status to see your timer count down. For entertainment like music, there's a couple mini games, but you have to start them within the settings menu. You can flip to flash something for a couple seconds, like the clock, but it doesn't always work. Shake to show a different widget you've chosen, but there is no way to have one of these basic widgets like the clock or battery percent permanently enabled. You can only have one of the animals permanently enabled, or a custom style which you can create yourself. You can turn on and off the active matrix display from a home screen widget, and even use that widget to switch between different animations. The confusing thing is that the tail light bar is also called the active matrix display in settings, and there is no way to have it always on or have it work at the same time as the actual matrix display, regardless of what you do with that light effect duration setting. Trust me, I've tried it all. You see, this is what I'm talking about. The feature is there, and it's very cool, it's just been very poorly executed. I love the idea, but it's so frustrating that I'd probably land up never using it. Unless maybe they fix it with a future software update. The side rails are made from aluminum, which is great. There's a textured Pininfarina logo on the frame, and above that is what they call a one-tap button, aka a shortcut key, which can toggle sound profiles or be customized in settings. I wonder what inspired that. On the other side, there's a nice looking power button, and under that is a camera No wait, there's sensors in there. It's in the same position as a camera control button, but it's actually a health monitoring sensor to track things like heart rates and blood oxygen levels. Why? I mean, it works sometimes, but let's be real, if you're into health monitoring, you probably already own a smartwatch. Like I said, this phone includes so much, but what does it actually include that's useful? Alright, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh because it is a really great price, so let's focus on what actually makes this phone a good phone for that price. So there's an always-on display, but it can only be shown for 5 seconds. There's an under-display fingerprint sensor, but it's very low down and it's optical, not ultrasonic. There's a completely flat, very bright 4500 nit 1.5K resolution, 144Hz refresh rate, 6.78-inch AMOLED display with 2304Hz PWM dimming, and it is a gorgeous looking display that boasts incredibly vivid colors, but it's only protected by Gorilla Glass 7i. It also only has an IP64 dust and water certification. It's also extremely heavy at 220 grams, but it's actually pretty thin at 7.9 millimeters, despite it housing a self-healing 7000 mAh silicon carbon battery backed by 100 watt wide charging, 50 watt wireless charging, and to make it even extra ultra, there is reverse wireless charging as well as adaptive bypass charging. But powering it is a sub-flagship level chipset, the MediaTek Dimensity 8400 Ultimate, featuring an all-big core design and a max clock speed of 3.25 GHz. There's also 12 gigs of LPDDR5X RAM, up to 512 gigs of UFS 4 storage, and a new ice core cooling system with a large vapor chamber to keep things cool. So it's no slouch when it comes to benchmark scores. It doesn't quite reach flagship CPU scores, but gaming performance is what really matters here. And when playing Genshin Impact on maxed out settings, which is a 60 FPS capped, very demanding game to play, we averaged a solid 60 FPS most of the time. There's also a game menu when in-game, which packs in so many different features, but there's no upscaling or frame interpolation feature, and there's no performance monitoring tool. Wuthering Waves is also limited to 60 FPS, but it's a lot more demanding, and the phone averaged around 43 FPS, which is okay, considering we cranked all the graphical settings to the max. There was quite a bit of frame stutter though, and the phone definitely warmed up quite a bit in the hand, and its brightness kinda dropped a bit as well to prevent it from overheating. Call of Duty Mobile doesn't have an FPS cap, but it's not the most graphically intense game. We set the in-game FPS to Ultra with super resolution enabled and averaged 120 FPS while playing, which is really good to see. But this phone has a 144Hz display, so it's a bit disappointing that it hasn't been fully optimized to run this game at its native refresh rate. Haptic feedback is actually very good, and while the JBL-tuned 360-degree dual stereo speakers get plenty loud and offer superb quality, the bottom speaker gets a lot, and I mean a lot louder than the top speaker.
You can't keep up with me.
There's no doubt that this phone will satisfy most gamers, and for everyday performance, there is also a built-in optimization engine which makes the phone feel extremely snappy when using the system UI. It relies on XOS 16, which is skinned over Android 16, and while out the box it's very car-themed in terms of wallpapers and icons, I managed to get it looking more like a normal phone. There's something called glow space, which affects visual elements and gives it a bit of a liquid glass look. There's adjustable folders and even folder scrolling, but the folder order when scrolling is a bit all over the place. There's of course widgets, and some of them have clearly been inspired by iOS. And while there are stackable widgets, you can only stack them on top of the AI suggestions widget, and there's no way of removing the actual AI suggestions card that comes with it. You also can't add more than one of the same widgets to your home screen. There's dynamic bar, which is again very iPhone driven, and there's also a built-in AI assistant called Folax, and the cool thing with it is that it includes all the AI models like ChatGPT and Gemini without needing to download additional apps or subscribe to any service. But you can of course completely change the default digital assistant if you'd like. There's a ton of other AI features too, and while there is Circle to Search, there is no Google Discover to the left of the home screen. Infinix are also promising 3 years of OS updates and 5 years of security patches, but that's pretty low when compared to other brands. There is free global two-way satellite communication, which is a very big deal, but it's limited to certain countries. There is 5G of course, but there's also eSIM support, which is another big deal. There's an IR Blaster too, and you can even share files with iPhones, though you need to download a separate app on your iPhone for it to work. So what's left? The cameras. On the front, there's a 32 megapixel snapper, and inside that stunning camera module sits a 200 megapixel ISOCELL HPE main sensor and a 50 megapixel periscope camera with 3.5 times optical zoom, both of which have optical image stabilization. So its camera sensors seem worthy of the Ultra title. But no, wait. There's only an 8 megapixel ultra-wide camera. And it takes average at best photos, even when in good daylight. The main camera takes absolutely stunning snaps though, and that's expected when using a flagship sensor. The periscope also offers superb quality photos filled with detail and excellent dynamic range. And it even allows for 7 times lossless zoom, which is great, but going past that to 10 times is not exactly the best I've seen. 20 times zoom is still acceptable, and while there is 100 times max zoom, it's a serious letdown, especially since I took this pic midday. There is a portrait mode option, but I prefer natural shallow depth of field, and since the main and periscope have large sensors with wide apertures, they both provide fantastic natural background blur. And color me impressed, there is a panorama selfie feature and it works brilliantly. Aside from the overexposed background. Using regular selfie mode also results in great photos with much better exposure handling, and the portrait mode offers very good edge detection. Selfies at night come out great too, and while the main and periscope take decent pics of me at night, they are far from perfect in terms of detail. Using the ultra-wide at night takes, well, yeah, okay. And while the main camera produces very good photos at night, there is a lot of pixel smoothing, artificial saturation, and light noise isn't handled the best. I was really expecting more here. The periscope handles light noise a lot better, and I'm very satisfied with how snaps came out at night. But while 7 times lossless zoom looks okay, 10 times zoom is very average, and don't even get me started on high-level focal lengths at night. It's good to see an option for 2K recording when using the ultra-wide to record video, but there is no 60 FPS option at all, and while it achieves fantastic stabilization, it is seriously overexposed and lacks a ton of detail. Main video comes out looking a lot better in terms of detail and exposure, and it's awesome to see an option for 4K 60 FPS video here, but stability isn't exactly perfect, despite the inclusion of OIS. Slow motion can be recorded with the main and periscope lens, but 1080p at 240 frames per second is the limit. And while the slow motion part is there, quality is certainly a hit and miss. We can also record 4K 60 FPS video with the periscope at a 3.5 times optical level, and I must say I'm very pleased with the results. Detail is above average, stability is very good, and I was very surprised with how smooth panning came out. There is a portrait video mode which can be used for the main and telephoto, but it's limited to just 1080p 30 FPS, so I'd much rather use standard video to achieve 4K resolution. Detail is certainly there, and so is natural depth, but color accuracy is a bit inconsistent.
But when it comes to selfie video, of course, we do kind of need a portrait mode. Luckily there is one, but it's capped at 1080p resolution and 30 frames per second. And unfortunately, when you do use it, when using the selfie cam, it disables the stability feature. So it should be a little bit shaky. Nevertheless, let me know your thoughts. But then we do have 4K 30 FPS as an option when using the selfie camera outside of portrait video mode. And we can use the stability feature, so it should look a lot better. Let me know your thoughts. We've also enabled the voice priority microphone mode. So let me know if you can hear a difference as well. Sucks that there's no 4K 60 FPS option, but at least there's 4K, so that's a good sign. You can also do 1080p 60, but 4K is always nice and crisp. Let me know your thoughts on the video as well as the microphone performance.
4K selfie video looks good at night too, but unfortunately it suffers from some pretty bad lens flare when lights are in the background. Rear video of me at night is again very acceptable, but again, color consistency is very noticeable, and not in a good way. Ultra-wide video isn't as bad as I was expecting at night, but of course light noise is handled very badly. Light noise handling with the main sensor is a lot better, but it's far from flagship level. Though aside from some focus breathing, detail is decent. And while there's a bit of noise grain when shooting video at night with the periscope lens, detail is certainly there, and so is fantastic stability and panning, just like we saw during daytime. Is camera quality on an ultra level? Sometimes. Is it better than most phones at this price point? Definitely. Aside from video performance and that horrible ultra-wide camera, of course. Before we completely wrap things up, it's worth mentioning that there is also a Pro model in the Note 60 lineup, and it costs just $300. Its box isn't as fancy, but it comes with a hard shell MagSafe case, a charging cable, a 90-watt charging block, and also includes Type-C earbuds. It has the exact same horrible ultra-wide camera, so we won't compare that. It lacks a telephoto camera, and it uses a 50-megapixel main camera and a 13-megapixel selfie camera instead. Its selfie camera doesn't have as wide a field of view, and the Ultra takes noticeably better pics. The main sensor is significantly worse than the Ultra 2. It has a similar design, though not as streamlined, and there is a Pininfarina designed version of it too. It has the same hidden matrix display on the camera island with all the same features, but there's a square LED instead of the light bar. It also has metal frames, the same shortcut key, and the same health sensor too. It offers the same IP certification, the same Gorilla Glass protection on the front, and the exact same display with the same set of speakers. It offers the same software with the same features but lacks satellite communication, has limited eSIM support, a smaller cooling system, a worse performing Snapdragon 7S Gen 4 chipset, a smaller battery, and slower charging. But its battery is far from small at 6,500 mAh, and its charging is far from slow at 90 watts, and it also manages to still squeeze in wireless charging, though at a slightly slower 30 watts. That is actually insane value for money. I mean, you could buy 2 of these Pro models for one of the Ultras and still have money left over. They did manage to put a ton of stuff into the Ultra for a very good price though. I just feel that the money that went into things like box contents, the matrix display, the health sensor, etc. could have been better spent elsewhere. But then again, that's what makes this phone stand out. Well, that and its price of course. As always, this is TechNick, and I'll catch you in the next one.